A wacky rig is one of the best baits we have at catching fish. All species of bass love it. From north to south, east to west, you can catch bass anywhere on a wacky rig all year long. One of the best ways to fish it is weightless because you get a great fall and a great presentation out of it. But the problem with that is it can be very difficult to use in deep water. If you've got current or wind, or just don't have the patience to fish it in deep water, it can be difficult. But I've got a tip for you that will solve that. One thing that I've been doing for years that I really love to do on northern bodies of water, deep outside weed lines, 10 to 20 foot of water, is I'll fish this wacky rig weightless, but I'll do it on a heavy bass casting weight. And specifically, the setup for this is you tie a swivel to your main line, and then you tie a 3 or 4 foot leader of line. You take your tag end and you just slide the tag end through your wacky rig hook so that your line swings freely. And then at the bottom, you tie a bass casting weight. And specifically, what this contraption does is when you make a long cast, your wacky rig will slide all the way up to your swivel. So when you make a cast, you let the bait fall, the weight will separate from the worm. Your weight will pull the worm all the way up to your swivel, and at this point, you hold your line tight and your wacky rig will just fall weightless down to the weight. Once it gets down to the bottom, I'll reel it 10, 15 feet, and at that point, the worm will be back up to the weight. I let it fall again. The worm will now be about 4 feet off the bottom, and on tight line, you just hold it and you get the same weightless wacky rig fall that you normally would get based on this sliding presentation. Now, the one thing I will say is when it comes to hookups on it, if you feel the bite, don't just set the hook right away. You just reel into them, basically like you'd be drop shotting. You reel into them because if they bite, when you have 2 feet of line between the weight and the worm, you got to reel that slack up. Once you reel that slack up, it tightens up and you'll hook the fish every time. Great way to fish a weightless wacky rig in deep water without having to wait for your bait to fall 15 or 20 feet to get into the strike zone. I've been doing this, catching fish all over the country. You're going to check it out. You're going to have some good luck if you give it a try.
All right, so it's April, which means it's spawning season. These fish are up shallow. They're either cruising around, they're staging to hit the beds, or they're actively on the beds, which means that these fish are really highly pressured. And so one of the best techniques that I still year after year catch a ton of fish on and a ton of big fish too is the wacky rig. A very, very simple technique, probably the most simple rigging style in bass fishing. You're essentially taking a straight tail worm or a stick bait, such as this Z-Man Zinkers here that's loaded with salt, and you're essentially just hooking it right through the middle with a finesse worm hook. This right here is a hook that's designed especially for wacky rig. It's the WRM 201. It's a medium wire hook from Hayabusa, but it's got that wide gap, great hooking percentage, but it's also really strong too. And then I'll just kind of run through the rest of my tackle real quick. I'm going to be using usually about a 10-foot leader of 10 or 12 pound test gold label fluorocarbon. Gold label is great because it has a small diameter per pound test. And so like when I'm fishing 12-pound tests, it's pretty much like fishing 10-pound test, a comparable fluorocarbon. So I use about a 10-foot leader of that. And then I've got a 20-pound test braided main line that I tie that to a Seagar Smackdown. And then I'm fishing this on spinning gear exclusively. I never fish a wacky rig on casting gear. So I use either a 610 medium heavy rod or a 7.2 medium heavy rod. I use the Versa series for the wacky rig. And then a spinning reel. This is the Stunner from Fitzgerald. And essentially, the wacky rig, man, you're just going to be casting this around, in and around, not really in, but you're casting it around isolated cover where the fish are staging, spawning, or cruising. So some of the types of cover that come to mind have got to be stumps, docks, brush, and grass lines, grass edges, and things like that. So you're just essentially casting where you think that the fish are spawning or staging. Really the tip that I wanted to give you guys today, because a lot of you already know about the Wacky rig and how to rig it and all that. The traditional way is just hooking it through the middle of the bare worm, weightless, and that's a great way to fish it, especially with the zinkers. It's made of Elastec, so it's really, really durable. So you really don't have to do anything more to keep this bait on the hook. But most traditional soft plastics, the struggle with them is that they're gonna come off. You're gonna go through a lot of these stick baits or these straight-tailed worms, and so there's a tool out there that a lot of people like to use, which is a Wacky Rig O-ring tool. So it helps you put on these O-rings that essentially you're able to kind of hook underneath to make sure that you don't lose your worm every single cast or every single fish. So the way it works is essentially just stick your bait in the tool like that, and then you push one of these rings onto the worm. All right, very simple. All right, so if you do it like that, like everybody else does, remember when I had this bait hooked without the ring? Okay, it's hooked like this, which means that the hook is perpendicular to the worm. Okay, that creates a really good hooking percentage. But one thing that it doesn't do is it doesn't give a very good weedless presentation. You tend to hook into things if you're casting around this stuff. So putting that one ring on there allows you to hook the worm with the hook parallel to the worm, which the worm then becomes somewhat of a weed guard. It doesn't really snag on as many things, so it becomes a little bit more weedless. But the struggle with that is that you actually have a slightly worse hooking percentage because the worm's kind of protecting the hook point a little bit. It's not a lot. I mean, it's not like an extreme amount, but your hooking percentage does go down. So if you still want to use one of these rubber O-rings on your Wacky rig to be able to preserve your worms and not spend a ton of money fishing the Wacky rig, but you also want to have that perpendicular orientation of your hook, here's a trick. And this is the long-winded introduction to this trick, but essentially you put it back in. You've already got one of the rings on there. All right, so I'm going to kind of kink the worm a little bit, and then I'm going to slide that second one over, and it's going to create a crisscross. Okay, so that the X pattern. Now what I can do is I can take my hook and I can slide it underneath both of those like so, and now I've got the O-ring, but I've got that perpendicular orientation of the hook that's going to allow me to hook more fish. Again, it's a slight improvement in hooking percentage, but it can make a big difference if you're not fishing around cover and it's more open water. This is probably the way you want to go.
So as an angler, there's a good chance you probably have another partner, a friend, companion, somebody you work with that you talk to about fishing. And you bounce ideas off each other. You go ahead and share some strategies, how you're going to go attack your body of water, go attack this body of water. And you kind of know after a while what their answer is going to be, and you know how they fish. Let's say you want a different opinion, or you want a different strategy or technique, or just even different advice on how to attack your body of water, or maybe an upcoming trip you're going to take in a couple weeks or months, or this summer. Hey, go to the Fish the Moment website and check out our virtual lessons tab. With the virtual lessons, you can pick one of the members from our Fish the Moment team and get a one-on-one Zoom Google Meet lesson. And our guys, what they do is when you pick your lake, and it could be your home lake, it could be a different lake you don't fish much, or like I said earlier, it could be a trip somewhere, and there's a good chance one of our team members has fished that body of water, and they're going to give you their advice and expertise on what they would do in the time that you want to go fish. So go ahead, give it a shot. And hey, when you go in and do the selection of who you would like to pick with and get your thoughts and opinions are, you're going to see some dates and some times. Let's say a good date or time doesn't work for you. Hey, just email us at info@fishthemoment.com. We'll work out a time so you can go ahead and get your appointment and go ahead and talk to one of our guys. Like I said, what we do is when we see the lake, we at least spend an hour of getting ready and getting all of our information and pictures ready to share with you guys. So like I said, hey, don't miss out on this opportunity. It's pretty unique. Now, hey, let's get back to the video.
Hey guys, Kyle Cordiana. Listen, I'm about to give you one of the wackiest, wacky worm, wacky tips you've ever heard of, but it works. So if you're looking to do something a little bit different with your wacky worm, listen to this tip right here. I had a scenario on, I'm not going to tell you the lake, but it was an Ozark lake, and it was springtime. The fish were spawning. The water had risen, flooded bushes everywhere. It's go time. Water rose, temperature got hot, water got hot, fish pulled up, they're spawning everywhere. A wacky worm was how I got to the fish and got them to bite something no one else could get to bite. All right, so this is what I did. I took a wacky worm, and there's two different ways to do this, but I weighted the wacky worm by inserting a nail weight into the worm, or there are some pre-made jig heads that are already weighted. The most important part about this is I was wacky worming flooded bushes. I was literally doodle socking or vertical dropping a wacky worm on the back side of flooded bushes where these fish were spawning. And yeah, you could flip a Texas rig, plastic in there, or saw a jig or something. They wouldn't bite it like they would this wacky worm. I went right behind people, literally doodle socked, meaning vertically dropped that wacky worm into that bush, and as it was free falling, it was boom, and then I had to get him out. So first things first, you want to use a 7-foot medium heavy or heavier spinning rod. This ain't no like finesse fishing. You're wacky worming, you're going straight braid, 15, 30 pound braid, but you want straight braid because you're dropping this in them bushes and you got to get them out of there. So if you've ever been doodle soccering for crappie and you're dropping your jigs and bushes, you probably do that straight braid too. You're basically doodle socking for bass with a wacky worm, and you're going to get a lot of bites doing it. So let me show you the two ways to rig the worm. Okay, you got the equipment. I'm a big fan of the Trocar Pro V bends. Make sure they have the weed guard. You can use a number 1 or number 2 style hook, or there's a bunch of different brands out there that already have the weighted hook if you prefer to do that. The reason I prefer to use just the standard hook with no weight on it, it hides the bait a lot better. You know, they don't see that big weighted head. May not matter, but that's my preference. Those are your options. What color worm? Depends on the color of the water, but I'm a huge fan of green pumpkin or this one. This is a Yum Dinger. This is Ozark Shadow. It's got a little bit of purple and black pepper flake in it, but it's basically green pumpkin on steroids. And so there's a little bit of slit. You see that slit right there? That comes in a Yum Dinger. No other stickworm has that slit just like that. Help me help you. You can get all your Yum plastics, any of the Pradco brand products over at lurenet.com. Use my coupon code Cortiana15, Cortiana15. Cortiana15 saves you 15%, and they give me a little kickback. So help me help you. Go get your Yum Dingers, Ozark Shadow, the money color, all those different colors. Save yourself 15% and help me out. Take your bait, and you're gonna rig it in that slit. You're gonna rig it right where the slit is in the middle of the worm. So this is the head of the worm. I'm gonna call this the tail of the worm. And right where that slit stops in the middle, that's where you're gonna rig your hook, okay? So I'm gonna take the hook, literally put it right at the end of it. I'm gonna poke it straight through. I also don't throw an O-ring. A lot of people like to throw an O-ring. You can, you'll use less worms that way, but the hook becomes parallel with the bait. So with an O-ring, that hook, see how this hook is perpendicular with the bait? So when a fish takes it, my hook's out there to get it. If I put it on an O-ring, then my hook sits like this, like flush with it. And so to me, I've got a better hookup ratio like that. Notice where I've hooked it. Notice how the worm wants to hang tail down, not head down. And the reason I told you to hook it there is because I'm going to put a weight in this. I'm going to put the weight towards the front of the worm, which is going to level it out. Here's just a standard nail weight. I'm not going to put this whole thing in there. I'm going to cut it in half. So I'm going to take my bubble pliers right here, and I'm just going to snip it right in half. just like that. But, so now I've cut my nail weight in half. I've got 2 nails now. I can use this on 2 different worms. So now we got it hanging. Now I'm gonna take this slit. So I've got the hook in one slit, and then this slit, at the end of that, that's where I'm gonna put my nail weight. All right, so I'm gonna start the tip of the nail right there in that slit, okay? And I'm gonna take it, I'm gonna try to do this where you can see it. I'm shoving it straight to the worm, and I'm kind of trying to keep it right in line with the worm. So as I jam it in there, I'm trying to keep it in line with the worm, because I'm trying to hide that nail weight. I want it in there, but I'm not trying to get it to where it's got the worm all funky shaped. And then you're gonna go ahead and just bury it all the way in there with your thumb. And once I get it in there, I'm gonna try to kind of conceal it and hide it. Now I got my nail weight in there. Now see how the worm sets level? When that gets in the water, that's gonna help that thing fall faster, and it's gonna really make it shimmy fast. This is a fun, crazy way to catch bass in the spring. Flooded bushes, when they're spawning at the base of them bushes. You can do this in other techniques, but wacky worm in flooded bushes is not something most people do. Again, do that with straight braid, spinning rod for sure. You could probably do the baitcaster, but I don't recommend it. And that's it, guys. Try that technique out and see what you can do with that Yum Ozark Shadow weighted on that trocar hook. It's gonna catch them.